All right, this is Eric Kirk. I'm with Chuck Rogers. This is Redwood Wonk, May 13th, 2020. We have, as always, plenty to talk about. Do you want to start? I mean, there's a lot of news that's happened with Trump. But we might veer with some of the topics. We may veer away a little bit from President Trump this time around and talk about some of the other political areas. Why don't we get closest to home and discuss the California 25th district race? There was a special election after Katie Hill, was forced out pretty much because she had what they're calling an affair. I wouldn't call it an affair because it was all consensual between the three of them, but it was, but was sexually deviant in a way that is not forgivable for women still today. And so she had to retire. So there was a special election held. Republican Garcia currently is ahead by 10 points against, I'm forgetting her first name, but her last name is Smith, Democrat. Democrat made some real serious missteps in the race, and there's no reason to go into that. But this stat here, and it may be that it turns around, although that's a pretty big lead to overcome. And although most networks haven't called it, the New York Times has called it for Garcia. A huge setback for the Democrats, and a warning about what could happen in November if they don't get people to return their mail-in ballots. This whole time, Republicans have been afraid that having the mail-ins would increase the turnout. But the key figure in that race is 40% of all white voters returned their absentee ballots. 21% of Latino. You cannot win that district with a 21% Latino turnout.
Well, and the Democrats cannot win nationally without a much higher turnout than the Republicans get. I mean, this is a microcosm of the big problem for Democrats, is that the Democrats have to win by overwhelming margins. And so turnout is the story for Democrats. And it's too bad because, this goes back to the 2018 midterms, where there was what ended up being called a blue tsunami, and now we've already given back one of the seats that we won,
right.
And in the state of California, which was supposed to be leading the way in this blue transition.
But let's be clear there. This is Ventura County, which is a lot more conservative than the rest of the coast.
Well, and it was among what was it, 7 seats that were flipped from Republican to Democrat. Yeah. And this was supposed to be the beginning of changing that part of Southern California, for example, from red to blue. That was much anticipated for a lot of election cycles. And it finally happened. And now we've already given back 1 seat. So if there's a lesson there, it is that it confirms that for Democrats, it's all about turnout. And with regard to mail-in, you're right. The Republicans have been saying, including Trump himself, that they're totally opposed to mail-in balloting. But in this case, it made the difference for them, and which confirms what a lot of people have been saying who've been looking at the statistics going very far back in time with regard to mail-in voting, that there's really no way to say that it benefits one or the other. It still comes down to turnout, which means in the case of mail-in voting that somebody has to actually make the effort to fill out the ballot and mail it back. That qualifies as turnout just as much as somebody physically going to a polling place.
This means that Democrats are going to have to get on the phone and call those voters and say, have you returned that? Because a lot of people, especially if they're not really high in education, may not even know what it is and not even open the thing. They might, they say, I didn't ask for an absentee ballot. They have got to get the word out on that because it's going to get a lot closer. Late provided late submitted absentee ballots tend to be about the same as same day voting in terms of how they vote, as opposed to early ones tends to be, maybe it's because liberals are just flakes, we just don't get it in on time. But that's the way it is in Humboldt County and everywhere around the state and probably around the country. But so it will get closer, but 10 points is a big margin to make up with with that. But we do know that, we have that stat. The Democrats know what they need to do. Question is, what are they going to do about that? And by the way, that very seat could flip back in 6 months. Yes,
That's right. That's a big point to make. And maybe the lesson will be learned between now and November, because the general election is in November. This election, we're recording this on the 13th. The election was on the 12th. That election was just to fill out the balance of the term, which runs, through the next few months. So the November election, this will basically be a rerun. So maybe Democrats will have learned the lesson, and they'll, get motivated to get those November the 3rd ballots returned. So
yeah.
we'll see.
They also made some real mistakes in this one. Ms. Smith, made a snide comment saying, "Hey, did you hear he's a pilot?" Garcia, he was really playing up his military, and she kind of did an eye roll thing about it. Doesn't play well in a district with a lot of military industry. Katie Hill tried to get on and do a podcast to get people out to vote. Just reminded everybody of why they don't like her, and it was another blonde woman running, and so a lot of associations could be made. I mean, they really cannot afford to make those kind of mistakes for this, and they need to not lose seats. They need to pick up House seats, and they need to really pick up Senate seats. Which, speaking about the Senate, you've seen some mixed polling, and I've seen polling all over the place. By the way, Gallup seems to be favoring Trump a lot this year. For instance, during the impeachment hearing, it's the one that all the media talked about because they were saying that he had positive approval rating. It turned out to be the only one where he did have a positive approval rating. Even the Republican Rasmussen, which I think is kind of a quack poll outfit, but still has credibility and I'll go into it another time, but they're always an outlier, and then all of a sudden at the last minute, the days before the election, all of a sudden they come in with everyone else. That way they keep their ratings high. But even they have them with negative disapproval back then and now, and so it's So, we don't know. Biden is doing well in a lot of the states. I saw a poll where he was 3 points ahead in Wisconsin, 2 points behind in Ohio, which is really good, ahead in Pennsylvania, and ahead in Arizona, and within 5 points of Texas, and also pretty close in Georgia. So those are good figures, but those are snapshots, and things could change in a minute, and we don't know, what is going on. And the Democrats that needs to be a wake up call. What happened? The Wisconsin one, they also lost in, but that's not as big of a concern. It's not really a swing district. They were hoping that they'd be able to win it, but it was a long shot.
Right. Well, and speaking of things changing just within a minute, you're right. In fact, just this afternoon, I think it was about 4 o'clock our time here on the West Coast, there was a poll released by CNN. I believe it was CNN and the Washington Post together, which I was very surprised. Their previous poll from just a month ago, similar poll showed Biden ahead by 11 points. The one they released today showed that it had narrowed to 4.5 points. Now that's very concerning, because if you dive down below that just overall national number, remembering that we don't elect presidents nationally, we elect them in 50 state elections because of the Electoral College. So if you dive down below that national number and you look at about a dozen or so swing states, depending upon how you define what a swing state is statistically, but if you look at about 10 to 12 of them, it shows that Trump is actually ahead by 5 points in those 12 states aggregated together. And that's very concerning because that's exactly how he won last time. Remember, losing the national popular vote, but winning in just the right number of swing states. And that seems to be where he was as of just a couple of hours ago today.
Now, I didn't believe that 11. I thought that was really optimistic, that 11 points before, pretty high. But there's definitely been movement, obviously, especially if they're using the same methods.
That's what this poll showed, and possibly a lot of movement. Now, it's also true that two things. We're still way out from still a long way to been named running mate yet, and actually hasn't even officially gotten the nomination. So there's that. But there's also the fact that people right now, presumably, are focused mostly on the whole coronavirus thing and what their job outlook is and what their financial outlook is, whether their kids are going to be back in school in the summer or in the fall even. So there's a lot on people's minds other than politics right now. So it's difficult to know how much to believe the polls right now.
Well, we also have two other things. We have the Tara Reid, which is not going away. And
Right.
so far, Biden has given one where he did okay, one interview where he did okay in it. And they've got to figure out how they're going to deal with that.
Yes.
And if there is anything to what she is saying, the DNC people have got to get to him behind the scenes and say, you got to drop out. You got to set aside and let us do that. If not, then, it's a political hit. And I learned today, actually, that Tara Reid used to live in Humboldt County. It was in a book group of a friend of mine. And she says that she was always raving about how Biden was this great guy. She used to work for him and how good he was, which is kind of consistent with some of the accounts. And that does call into question some of what she's saying, but they've got to figure out a way to address it. The other thing, and I'm not sure it's really resonating because I think most people don't understand it, but they're calling it Obamagate because apparently there's some emails in which it appeared that they wanted to out Flynn during the election. They didn't do it, by the way, but they were talking about it.
No, let me make one quick comment on that. I'm glad you brought that up because this long list of things we need to talk about, that's one that I forgot to put on the list. One thing to think about regarding the Michael Flynn and the supposed Obamagate issue that Trump's trying to make a big issue nationally is this. Recall after the 2016 election, during the transition period from November up to inauguration in January, the head of the Trump transition team originally was Republican Chris Christie. Of course, everybody will remember him as a former candidate for president during that cycle, and also the Republican governor of New Jersey. Chris Christie was the one who originally took Mike Flynn off of their list, saying that he's not fit to serve in the Trump administration. The response, and again, that's a Republican. The response to that was that Jared Kushner and Steve Bannon then fired Chris Christie, installed another head of the transition to get Mike Flynn back on board. So there's evidence of folks high up in the Republican Party who thought that Flynn was not qualified and not fit even before Trump was inaugurated.
Yes.
So to say that that's Obamagate is completely wrong. And I'm hoping the Democrats will jump all over that and respond to the Obamagate accusations with ads themselves that point out that it was Republican Chris Christie who originally raised a flag about or the alarm bells about Mike Flynn and not Barack Obama alone.
Yes. Yeah, I know. It's a joke of a thing. They're looking for it as a distraction.
Right.
We know that he's not going to prosecute Obama or any of those officials. We know it's all talk because it would blow up in his face. He knows it, and Trump is not that brave. He never prosecuted Hillary Clinton because that would have blown up in his face as well, just like Benghazi. So.
Yeah, but do you think Bill Barr would be the attack dog for him on that? If Barr knows that that's what Trump would want?
If that's what Trump wants, he would do it. But I don't think they want to do that. I think that would be a huge mistake, especially during an election year. Maybe next year, if they win, they'll try to do some of the stuff to consolidate power. But I don't think they'll do anything like that before the election. It would just, they've got some things going for them right now. Is that they're in the media all the time but I do think the biggest factor in the slide may be, as you were saying before, is people are getting anxious about their future, and he's lifting guidelines and wanting to get people back to work.
Yep.
And of course, the risk they take is that he succeeds in doing that, and then we're slammed again and have to come
as
back.
of this week, he's also attacking Dr. Fauci. I don't know if you've been following that at all, but
the
Trump
Republicans have.
Yeah, Trump TV and the reelection apparatus have been sending out all kinds of charges against Dr. Fauci. And I know that Trump TV has been asking, is this really the person you want to make decisions about coronavirus? Well, my answer is yes, because he's a scientist. So with a terrific history in the field of public health. So, yeah, it is the person I want to listen to.
Yeah, the Senate Republicans are attacking him too. Rand Paul
yes.
is attacking him, and again, what I think the Democrats ought to do is they ought to be aggressive here and say, well, if you think he's so bad, why don't you fire him? You're the one who can do it, right? I mean, I think they really need to do it, dare him to do it. I don't think he would do it because, man, that could lead to a lot of problems. Dr. Fauci, I notice, is not part of it. The woman, I'm forgetting her name,
Dr. Birx.
Dr. Birx is putting pressure on the CDC to fool with the numbers, to reduce it to only numbers where they were actually tested. Whereas, we know that there are a lot more deaths. I don't, people don't necessarily go by CDC. More people actually cite Johns Hopkins. And another site called 1 and 3 Acres for the numbers, because they get the true numbers. They've got sources in every county and every place, and they get the numbers ahead of time. So I think that'll backfire on them. But so what do they want to do? If they want to go attack Dr. Fauci, I don't think the Democrats should sit back. I think Democrats should defend him and say, but if you really think he's so bad, fire him.
I think that's a good strategy. Call their bluff on it. Absolutely call their bluff. And here's why, because, and again, here we go with polling again, and who knows, but the polling shows 70% and above approval for Dr. Fauci and people wanting to get information through his office. So I agree with you. I think that they should call the bluff and say, well, yeah, go ahead and fire him, see what happens. And let's move forward. One other quick thing on that, you brought up Dr. Birx. I'm having trouble figuring out what her calculation is as of this week, in that she is the one who's leading the charge against the CDC to try to get them to revise downward the death count, when most scientists are saying that it's probably even higher than what the CDC is reporting. I don't know what her calculation from a scientific medical standpoint would be.
I think she's just trying to stay in his good graces. She sees what's happening to Dr. Fauci, and so.
But what about her credibility as a physician and a scientist?
Maybe she just figures, I just want to get through this crisis. And if, it could be, I don't know why she's doing it. It's going to get her attacked, and her credibility is going to be attacked from the Democrats for this. She shouldn't be the one doing it, but maybe she's doing it because she thinks that Dr. Fauci is going to be fired, and maybe she doesn't want to be fired because then they'll just bring in nutcases and to take these positions. So. Anyway, that's where we go from there. Did you say you knew about Senate races too?
Yeah, polling from earlier this week that was quite good for Democrats in, I've got it right here, Colorado, North Carolina, and Montana, U.S. Senate races. In Colorado, Hickenlooper, who's the former Democratic governor and former presidential candidate, running against the incumbent, one-term incumbent, Cory Gardner. Hickenlooper right now is ahead statewide by 17 points. In North Carolina, Cal Cunningham, who's running against the incumbent there, Tom Tillis, is ahead by 9.
Wow.
And in Montana, the current Democratic governor, Steve Bullock, also a former presidential candidate, is ahead of the incumbent Senator Steve Daines by 7 points.
That doesn't surprise me very much. Senator Tester gets reelected each time, even though he spends a lot of money. So I think there is a kind of a hidden blue element in Montana that sometimes comes to the surface and sometimes doesn't.
Yeah,
Uh,
I agree. Now, others that were talked about in these poll results were also races in Maine. That's Susan Collins, of course, and a couple of other races here and there that were not as easy to decipher as those three. So there are others that are possible pickups for the Democrats, which, and they need to get as many as they can in case they lose Jones in Alabama, and in case they lose, who knows what other seat.
well, I
So
did see a poll that had Amy McGrath really close
yeah,
to
in Arizona, yeah.
or no, Amy McGrath in Kentucky for
Oh,
against
Mitch
McConnell.
McConnell,
Yeah.
yeah,
Arizona, I think the
Kelly.
Democrat is pretty solidly ahead, but in Kentucky, that's if now that would be a blue wave if it took McConnell out.
Yeah, it would be, and there's something to keep an eye on with that. The Democrats in the House have put forth another stimulus bill that includes relief for a huge list of different kinds of categories of folks here financially. The Republicans, including McConnell and Lindsey Graham, have said that bill is dead on arrival in the Senate,
Yeah.
and it beggars the imagination as to why, in a situation like we're in right now, Republicans would defeat a relief bill in an election year when people are hurting and out of jobs and worried that maybe their jobs might not even come back. Not that this is temporary, but permanent. Especially in states like Kentucky and South Carolina that are not the wealthiest states in the country to start with. It just staggers me to think that they would go against that in an election year when they're both in races with strong opponents.
Yeah, and Lindsey Graham is obsessed over killing that $600 deal for lower income people. Obsessed with it. I mean, he and two other Republican senators were threatening to put the kibosh on that whole first one. And Bernie Sanders said, "Look, if you take that out, I'm going to do it." He says, what? How will the universe survive if poor people are getting the same benefits as people higher up on the rungs? I mean, it was just, okay, maybe they won't want to go back to work right away because they're actually getting paid pretty well, but we're in a pandemic emergency. Give them the money, they'll spend it.
And how long will $600 really last anyway, regardless of what state you live in?
Yeah.
But speaking of Lindsey Graham in that state, and the people who are listening to this can look this up. This past Sunday, which would have been the 10th of May, this past Sunday there was an op-ed in the Greenville, South Carolina paper. In Greenville now, over the last 10 years, has boomed in population. So it's a major population center now in the state of South Carolina. There was an op-ed in the Greenville paper written by not just a Republican supporter of Lindsey Graham, but somebody who had actually financially backed him for a number of years, saying that he no longer supports Lindsey Graham for a whole list of reasons. Mm-hmm. But including going all the way back a couple of years here to Lindsey Graham's abandonment of John McCain as John McCain was being attacked by Donald Trump, mm-hmm. and urging other Republicans to revoke their support of Lindsey Graham and to support his opponent. Now, who knows how that's going to impact the election, but it is a voice in a major city in that state who's urging people to support someone other than Lindsey Graham. And I think that's something to keep an eye on.
Certainly worth an ad, huh?
You would think. You would hope.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty big deal. And his popularity, he's got some problems because he's really been aggressive. I think of all of the Trump supporters in the Senate, perhaps with the exception of McConnell, he's been the most, gung-ho. He was supposed to be the maverick who's going to stand up to Trump, right? That's what everybody thought after his campaign ended, and he's just been absolutely the water boy for him.
I think that's what everybody assumed. I agree with you 100%, and especially after we lost John McCain, unfortunately, I think everybody assumed that given the relationship over the years in the U.S. Senate between Graham and McCain, that Graham would be the natural person to take up the banner and the standard and carry it forward in the same vein as John McCain had. Yet he went in completely the opposite direction. In fact, the McCain family recently, just a couple of weeks ago, actually began speaking out publicly about this. And I haven't seen them on any produced ads in South Carolina, but at least they have made some murmurs about it as well. So it's a difficult one to figure out about why that happened and how long it's going to last.
Liz Cheney may be somewhat of a maverick. She's backing Dr. Fauci right now.
Yeah. And how many times have you agreed with Liz Cheney?
Yeah, I know. She's always had a little bit of an independent streak. Not enough, but we just, there is no moderate wing of the Republicans in office anymore. It's gone. It's really gone.
It's just Mitt Romney.
Yeah, Mitt Romney. You thought it was going to be Susan Collins and Murkowski, but they just. But when it's
Susan Collins, that's an interesting point you're making. It used to be Susan Collins, and it used to be Lindsey Graham, along with people like Mitt Romney and many others around the country, John McCain and a couple of Republicans in Massachusetts and so on, but no more. They have no place in that party anymore. I'm not even. In fact, here's another article people can look up. Jennifer Rubin, Republican columnist who writes for the Washington Post, wrote an article, as did Bill Kristol recently this week, both of them, talking about the fact that they have now moved to the point where they think the Republican Party is not salvageable at all. Mm-hmm. So now they are not just never Trumpers, they are never Republicans, because it's beyond the point of reviving it to what people thought it used to be. Now, where they're going to go was not completely outlined, but it was clear that they are at the point now that they do not think that the Republican Party that we knew can be revived. It will be something else permanently now. So where they go is a big question, because some of those never Trumpers, let's recall, have access to a lot of capital.
Yeah.
So if they wanted to mount some sort of insurgency, you would think that they could. Now, does that mean that they're going to back? Does that mean they're going to back the third party candidacy of Justin Amash, who's trying to get the Libertarian nomination? I don't know. Does it mean that down the road, a few years from now, they would reemerge in a brand new party that's kind of center right? I don't know. They haven't said. Would they start something within the Republican Party? I don't know. It's still to be determined. So we'll see.
Amash is, of course, thinking about a run, which has been interpreted as possibly hurting Biden, but it didn't seem to in a poll that had him. He had 5% of the vote, and Biden still had a lead. So it may very well be that it pries off some more Republicans than it does. It might help Republicans in the down ticket, because it'll take care of Republicans that would otherwise might just sit the election out. But it does look like he's looking towards a run. Who will it help? Conventional wisdom says that it would help Trump because it would, but I don't know about that.
Well, here's something to think about along those lines. Let's go back to 2016 again, because I still think there's a lot we can learn from that. One of the things that happened in 2016 was that Trump got a lot of votes that were hate votes against Hillary Clinton. Recent polling shows that people who still identify themselves as being somewhat undecided and somewhat moderate don't have those same feelings for Joe Biden. Presumably, it would be easier for them to vote for Biden than it was for them to vote for Hillary Clinton. So that might give us hope that if there is a Justin Amash candidacy, it would peel off more from Trump than Biden.
Right. Well, we don't know. And and he also hasn't committed to running, so we don't know if that's even going to happen. But that could be a factor that we're talking about as we get closer to the election. I just want to go back to the polls a little bit. I'm not sure. The CNN, I think, was an aggregate of the 12 states that they consider to be swing states,
Right.
And the rest are nationally. CNN, as released today, has Biden ahead by 5 points. Economist YouGov has Biden ahead by 4 points. And then in Wisconsin, Marquette, which is a gold standard pollster, has Biden ahead by 3 points there, Marquette University. And then Emerson has Trump ahead in Ohio by 3 points, but that's still pretty close, closer than I would have thought right now, and ahead in Texas by 6. And that's actually on the high end, because there was one Texas poll that actually had Biden ahead by a point. I didn't believe it, but there were a couple others that had him within 1 behind, and then another one had him 5 behind. So he's definitely well within single digits, possibly low digits in Texas. That's got to be a concern for Republicans.
Well, especially Texas. Think of the number of electoral votes. If Trump loses Texas,
he can't win.
He can't win. Exactly. Because if he loses Texas, you might also think, well, he's probably going to lose Georgia and Florida as well.
But even if he doesn't, if everything else stays the same, that would push Biden over.
Hopefully. Yeah. But here's my concern. And again, save me from my pessimism, Eric. But going back to 2016, what we learned again was that the Democrat has to win by more than just 2 or 3 points.
Yes.
The Democrat, some people think the Democrat has to win by between 8 and 11 points in order to make up for the losses in the Electoral College. So I like that we can point to numbers that show Biden ahead in some of those states where you wouldn't expect him to be ahead. But nationally, it's going to have to be more than just a couple of points to overcome the Electoral College. But I love to see Texas turn blue. Absolutely.
Well, and I'm going to predict, unless it's a complete debacle, that Biden will pick up Michigan. It was a fluke that Clinton lost it last time. It was just by a few, really not that many votes, but Michigan had a record number of over 70,000 ballots that had no vote for the top ticket, no vote for president. That's a lot of people who just weren't going to vote for Trump, but could not bring themselves to vote for Hillary Clinton. I don't think Biden will have that problem. And
the Democratic governor of Michigan right now has over 70% approval for her response to coronavirus.
Yeah, everybody thought that she was in trouble, but she's not, at least so far.
Not at all.
No, there are a lot of people that could turn around. We could see people, starting to hurt, especially if the unemployment, benefits don't get renewed and the rest. But who will take the hit for it not being renewed? Lindsey Graham is saying over his dead body will they extend the federal unemployment benefits. So, he may have to own that and its impact.
And it's still an open question as to whether this is going to be an election about policy like you're talking about, or whether this is just an absolutely divided country and it really doesn't matter. It's going to be how many people who love Trump turn out versus how many people who either hate Trump or think that Biden is at least an option, and how many of them turn out to vote. So we'll see.
All right. What do you think about one thing that's come up over the past week is some questions were coming in as to whether Biden is being effective from his basement, and he got a little defensive about it. First of all, I don't think he should be defensive about it. If it's his plan, he shouldn't have to say, well, I reject that. He should just keep doing what he's doing and not talk about it, because when he starts talking about it, then that raises the question even more. But I don't know that really, last time or the time before that, you said that probably it was in his best interest to keep a low profile. I tend to think that anyway. I think he should just not get headlines by complaining about it. I wouldn't have even known about those criticisms if I didn't see the headline of him rejecting them. So he just needs to keep his cool and just keep doing what he's doing. At a certain point, they'll come out if he's still the candidate and the convention, the virtual convention, hasn't chosen someone else. And maybe it's best that he do that for now.
Well, that brings up a couple of points. One, the idea that Uncle Joe should just stay in the basement, which would help deflect some of his weaknesses, like the fact that he's not quite as sharp as he used to be on the campaign trail and in public speaking. And because of his age, people will be very focused on any little mistake that he makes because of his age. And let Donald Trump make all the mistakes in public. So that's one thing. On the other hand, this recent polling may indicate that maybe at some point he's going to have to come out of his basement because people at some point are going to need to see him and need to hear from him in a more forceful way. Now, there is a possibility, though, that he could do that in a kind of a hybrid way, and that is maybe go ahead and name his vice presidential running mate as soon as possible, because the people he's selecting from, whether it's Stacey Abrams or Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren or Amy Klobuchar or whoever it's going to be, all of the people he's considering right now are terrific on their feet and in public and are smart and articulate and can hammer the information and the points that the Democrats have to make. So maybe what he can do is stay in his basement and do his online little spiels every day, and then name one of those terrific vice presidential nominees as soon as possible so that they can help out of their basement with some of that messaging that needs to get out there. So maybe that's one way he could have it both ways. And maybe move forward. At some point, he's going to have to make a decision on that.
Yeah, I thought he was going to do it earlier. There was word that he was going to do it, but I don't know. Maybe nobody wants to do it until they know how it's going to work out. They don't want to sign their name and then have another candidate chosen.
That could be. That could also be why we're seeing the first public appearance of Biden with Stacey Abrams tomorrow, which will be the 14th. Who knows? Maybe they're going to make an announcement. We don't know. Or maybe just the first in a line of public appearances with Biden and Stacey Abrams, and then Biden and Elizabeth Warren, and then Kamala Harris, and then Amy Klobuchar. Who knows? Gretchen Whitmer. Who knows? It's a long list. So who knows? But you could be right. Maybe some of the vice presidential candidates are waiting to see how some of the other issues turn out before they sign on to that campaign.
Now, the other thing is we say he should come out of his basement. What can he do? I mean, already Pence and Trump have gotten into a lot of, criticism for them going to the thing with Trump refusing to wear a mask and Pence first refusing, then putting one on, and the rest, and going to meatpacking places are the workers there are scared to death, so you don't get to see them with very many workers. What could what could Biden do? Yeah. Where can he go, and what could he do to be more public? No matter what, it seems like he's still going to be online. I don't know. Maybe he could have something behind him, but what would be a good place for him to visit, and how would they do that?
Well, I think you could visit some of the public places that would give him a good backdrop and a good showing of places to be. I agree with you that right now Trump and Pence are the ones who are making the public mistakes. So for right now, I guess I still think Joe should keep doing what he's doing, but I think he's got to get more attention than he's getting right now, and that's why I think he needs to get past some of the issues you and I have been talking about, and he needs to figure out who is going to be his running mate and add them to the list of information that is coming out of that campaign and on that side from the Democrats. I do not think he should make the same mistake that Trump and Pence have been making and going to crowded public places, not showing social distancing and not wearing a mask.
Right.
So no, that would be making the same mistake that Trump and Pence are making and taking an advantage away by falling into the same trap that they've fallen into.
Well, what if he went to some of the hard-hit hospitals, New York, New Jersey, I mean, I would think if he went there and toured and listened, showed him listening to what the healthcare workers have to say, those stories, are something that a lot of people, America is missing in terms of, we don't want this to happen again. What happened in New York City, it was really stressful, and a lot of it didn't, even make it onto television. I'm thinking that might be a strategy that he should go and highlight that, and highlight his policy differences as to we need to kind of reopen, but we need to do it in a really planned, scientific way that keeps the curve down so that the hospitals don't get inundated, because that's the risk. We can't save everybody from being infected. We're all probably going to be infected, or at least half of us, or 60% of us eventually. So all we can do is keep that curve flattened to under the hospital bed capacity in all the areas. And if we're not careful, we can overwhelm that and force physicians into the position of having to choose who lives and who dies. That should be right now, with all the push to reopen. That would seem to be a way to do it in a way that would be better than him just talking from his basement, if he could do that.
I like that. You make a great point. And, once again, here we go again to polling. But recently we've seen that, what is it, over 2/3 of Americans think that they want to get their information from people of the sort you're just mentioning there. And whereas only 30 or so percent want to get all of their information from the Trump administration. So maybe Biden could do that. And the hand he would be playing there is that most of America wants to go down the pathway led by science rather than the pathway led by Trump and Pence on this issue. So maybe that's the tactic he should take right now. I think you're probably right on that.
Yeah. Anyway, that's just a thought. We're getting towards the top. I haven't gotten my warning yet, but I think we're getting towards the top of our hour. We should probably think in terms of what do we anticipate happening over the next few weeks and months. I mean, Trump really seems to be losing it. I mean, he really does. See, those press conferences are just not doing him any favors. He stormed out of one after. We have 15 minutes. Okay. He stormed out of one after a couple of women. One woman who was Chinese asked a very fair question: "Why are you looking at me and saying, ask China?" He got defensive, and then he called on another woman, and she was in solidarity, kind of deferring, letting the first woman talk, and then he ended up just walking out on the whole thing. I'm sure a lot of his followers liked that, but I think most people see it as kind of childish.
And guess who I think does not like to see that? That's suburban Republican women who consider themselves somewhat moderate, because that looked very weak, and it looked dismissive, and it looked rude and condescending, and all of those things. So that argues again for selecting one of these terrific vice presidential candidates, all of whom are women, to go out there and just start hammering on all things Trump and Pence, to make him respond, because he cannot help himself. He has to respond. And when he's responding to women, it's always in a condescending way. And as that, speaking of an ad, that Rose Garden press conference should be a Democratic ad showing him just running away from women who are just doing their jobs and asking him very pertinent questions about things that are really on people's minds right now. And he just ran away.
There wasn't even a tough question.
No,
it was well, why is this a competition? All he had to do is shrug his shoulders and say, I don't see it as a competition, and just do that. But instead, well, talk to China. I mean, it doesn't even make sense. And so I know that there is a group for which this works. I see them. I talk to them on the internet. I've got family for whom it works. But I think you're right. The women in the suburbs of Philadelphia, are not going to be impressed with it.
Philadelphia for sure. But some of those swing states that we were talking about earlier, let's not forget that the city of Houston and the city of Dallas are ringed by suburbs with exactly the demographic you're talking about. And if, as you said earlier, Texas is in play, it makes as much sense as any other strategy to go down that road and force that issue, because you know exactly how he's going to react, and it's not going to look good.
Yeah. So where are you in terms of who do you think the VP is going to be?
Well, last week, as of last week, I would have said Elizabeth Warren. I'm very curious about this public appearance with Stacey Abrams tomorrow, though. I don't know if that's an audition or if that's an announcement.
Or a consolation prize.
Well, that could be. That could be. Maybe he's announcing that if I were to win, Stacey Abrams would be, some cabinet position. Who knows?
Yeah.
Or White House chief of staff or advisor of some sort. I don't know. So I guess I'm still of a mind that it's going to be Elizabeth Warren because of how well she polls with former Bernie supporters, which Biden has to have in big numbers to win. So I guess I'm still of a mind that it's going to be Elizabeth Warren. If I were betting, that's where my wager would still be. How about you?
He needs a wonk who is sharp on national and international issues. She is that. I mean, the other possibility of that type of skill and knowledge would be Klobuchar, but I don't think he can afford to do that. He needs to, something like half of all Bernie supporters say they're thinking about how they're going to vote in November. Could be, kind of a ploy. I think most of them will end up voting for Biden, but they need turnout. They need turnout from youth. Yes. They need turnout from Latinos. They need turnout, especially from Latinos. They need turnout from African Americans. I think that the other possibility is Harris. She's really sharp.
Yes.
Again, but that doesn't. I really think that with all those considerations, I still think Warren is the best choice for that. For that swing state of small, younger voters.
I agree with you. And just one final point on that. I think on a ticket like that, like Biden and Warren, Biden would be the one who would appeal to, or if not appeal to, at least be okay for the moderate Republicans who just can't stand Trump.
Right.
It would be Warren who would bring the Bernie voters in, and Biden needs both of those groups in big numbers.
Yeah.
So that's why I think just statistically it makes a lot of sense. I would be happy really with anybody on his list, and you can make a good case for all the people he's considering for sure. But I think just looking at the numbers, if Biden is amenable to the Republicans who can no longer support Trump and the independents who consider themselves to be still centrist, he can get those. He needs Warren for the Bernie voters.
Yeah. Now this is a less political perhaps and more of a practical matter, but what about those that swarm of positive tests in the White House? I mean, that could upend everything. If Trump becomes ill, even if he survives like Boris Johnson did, that's going to be a big deal. It'll look incompetent for one thing.
Yeah, and let's not forget Donald Trump is not a picture of health either. So he may be one of those folks who's very, very susceptible to having a long bout of it. Even if he does pretty well with it, it could still take him longer to recover than someone else who would be much younger and in better overall condition. So there's also that. It would also, though, just the optics of it. Let's remember that this is the guy who's so tough he doesn't have to wear a mask and has been tweeting out "Liberate Michigan" and "Liberate Minnesota" and all these others, and encouraging Republican governors to just lift all of these restrictions. And then he comes down with it. What does that say about what he's been telling all of his supporters heretofore?
I would say if he comes down with it, he's lost. Regardless of whether he survives, he will have lost. And that has to be a concern to people in there. I'm sure they're cleaning out anybody and replacing everybody at this point because they don't want to take any chances. But 11 Secret Service members and 3 personal assistants, that's pretty big, and that means we've got 14 days to know if anybody else was affected.
Exactly.
And that I would say is a big mess up. I'm surprised the Democrats haven't made more of an issue of that, saying you need to stop believing your own hype, and you need to really take this seriously and not be going out to plants and failing to wear a mask and all of that. It's just that, and I'm surprised they aren't taking more advantage of that. But
well, I think, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think I read that Mike Pence is now staying away from the Oval Office.
Yes.
A couple of days ago because of all of this.
Yeah, they're social distancing from each other. I know that's it's interesting, but we don't know who else was actually infected. I mean, that's a big deal.
And let's hope that they are contact tracing. I guess they are. I assume they must be.
They should be able to. I mean, they get records of everybody who comes anywhere near them and the rest. But I just, that going to the plant may have been a reckless thing for someone like him. I mean, that's just, you just don't know. And to not wear a mask, granted, there's a big debate as to the effectiveness of the mask for protecting the wearer. But it's anyway, I just think that would be devastating. And I think if anything, that's what the Republicans are most afraid of right now, because if he gets it, even if he survives like Boris Johnson did, Boris Johnson wasn't somebody who was, poo-pooing the science. Trump he wants everybody to do well, and it's really to get out and start working. It's really kind of a hard thing for, to push for everybody else to go out when he's out of it, and we'll see if that actually happens. And I don't wish that on anybody, but it's and I don't know, and I don't know how well. I doubt Pence could win in November. I don't think he's going to get the same stuff. And can you imagine the conspiracy theories if he passed away?
Well, and let's not forget that plant that you just referred to was a mask making plant where Trump was not wearing a mask.
No, he wore goggles for some reason, but he didn't.
Yeah, wore goggles.
Anyway, all right. Let's. We're less than 5 minutes, so why don't we get to predictions? I am going to start predicting some things. I'm predicting that unless everything completely falls apart, Biden is going to retake Michigan and retake Wisconsin. He's doing really well in Wisconsin. That Wisconsin election went really well. I'm not worried about this election yesterday on that. That's a very red district. I don't know what's going on or if the California thing is there, but again, he's got it. They've got to press on people that they've got to get those absentee ballots in, and they've got to have a method for trying to make sure that they get them in, because I think they absolutely dropped the ball in the 25th district.
Yeah. Well, I have two. One, I think Trump is going to continue to try to put the kibosh on mail-in voting, which I think is a mistake. But I think that he's going to. Yeah, exactly. On his part, exactly. I think there's a huge miscalculation there on the Trump reelection folks on that. So I think they're going to continue to hammer on that. The second thing is that I think, and we didn't get to this, but I think that the Supreme Court's arguments that they heard earlier this week in a couple of cases involving Trump's taxes and not about Trump himself, but about the folks who have them, who had been subpoenaed to make them available to House and Oversight investigators. I think in at least one of those cases, I have renewed faith in the Supreme Court that at least in one of those cases, they're going to say that that information has to be turned over, probably to the Manhattan District Attorney.
Right.
And that that will become part of the politics headed toward November, and we'll see who he owes money to and whether there's some undue influence there as a result.
And I'm wondering, okay, we've got a couple of minutes left. I'm wondering what's going to happen with this Mike Flynn case and what the political outcome of it is. I mean, to me, it looks like total corruption, right? The district, the DOJ, basically Barr is Trump's consigliere. I mean, that's what it is. He's acting on his behalf right now. The judge is apparently is a little bit concerned about that too.
Yes.
I would not be, if I was Flynn's defense team, I would not be opening any champagne just yet, because he may very well, the judge is asking for amicus curiae, which is friend of the court briefs from outside of the parties, to talk about criminal contempt. And what the options are, because I think the judge is clearly not impressed with Flynn. No matter what you get into about what the intentions were of the FBI people, he lied to the FBI. That's a crime.
And pleaded guilty to that twice, 2 guilty pleas. And let's not forget, I think his name is Judge Sullivan, if I'm not mistaken. He's the one that in his original decision read the riot act to Mike Flynn and accused him of, I believe his words from the bench were, selling out his country. So let's see how that goes. I think our faith is now in that judge, because Bill Barr is no longer acting like an attorney general. He's acting as Donald Trump's personal attorney, and that's concerning.
All right, we need to wrap this up. I also believe that criminal contempt, you can't pardon somebody from that. It's not, he hasn't been convicted of a crime. So if he's in jail for criminal contempt, he's in jail. Anyways, well, thank you very much, Chuck. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. And Matthew, behind the scenes there, thank you very much. And thank Access Humboldt and everybody out there listening on KZZH and on Channel 12. In 2 weeks, we'll be back.